Welcome everybody to our first Protego book club meeting. I am so excited to be here, and I'm so excited you are all hopefully very excited to be here as well. Welcome to the Protego Foundation book club. We're super excited to nerd out and reread the magical series. So I know we all have our copy. Well, I hope we all have our copies of Philosophers or Sorcerer's Stone, or at least we've skimmed and read up a little bit on that. And if not,
we'll listen to it.
Yeah, or listen to it. That's true. My mom was listening to it earlier this week. Because we want to, be able to, everybody reads, the books for different reasons sometimes. Being able to analyze it from the perspective, an animal rights perspective, and look at animals as sort of the main character and the main reason why we're reading this book was really exciting for everyone at the Protego Foundation. Just so we can all kind of get to know each other. If people want to put their favorite magical creature that we're introduced to in the first book. So I know we all have probably a lot of other favorites throughout the series, but maybe just stick to the first book for now, and we can talk about the other ones later on. And then also where you're tuning in from would be really cool. We want to see how far we've reached with this book club. So while you're doing that, thank you so much again for being here. A little bit about the Protego Foundation. We are a group of activists empowering all magical persons to get active for animals. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, the first 501c3 Harry Potter animal rights organization. And our goal is a wizarding fandom that is more considerate of the rights, feelings, and treatment of all creatures, regardless of species, size, or magical ability. So I see Hedwig, Fluffy. Fluffy. I see St. Louis. That's my friend Lydia. She's in St. Louis right now. There's the first question, Kay, was favorite magical creature introduced in the book. You probably already see that, but let's see. I see Norbert, Trevor, somebody from Texas, a couple people from Texas, South Australia. Welcome, Rebecca.
Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca.
That's exciting. Super cool. Oregon. That's awesome. Hi, everyone. Yay. A lot of New Yorkers. I'm in New York right now, currently upstate, but I live in New York City. I'm just visiting family right now for the holidays. Very cool. Oh, and I see my aunt in Argentina too. She's here.
Oh.
Very cool. So we're all spread out. So exciting. Cool. So just as a little intro, I already said that I'm the Finance and Development Director at the Protego Foundation. I'm also currently getting my master's at NYU it's kind of a DIY master's situation. So it's fan studies, linguistics, animal rights, sort of covers it all. So I'm looking at the way that we can use Harry Potter as a vehicle for social change, specifically with animal rights, and basically by analyzing the language used in the books toward animals, about animals, and how we can use that for good. And so I really was excited so for my thesis, I have to reread the whole series and look at it from an animal rights lens. And I thought, what better way to do that than have other people join in and give me your theories and ideas and all of that, because I really would love to hear what everybody else has to say about animals, because we all love animals and we all love Harry Potter, and I want to hear it all. So that's basically my spiel for why I wanted to do this book club, and everyone here on Team Protego is just as excited as I am to be here. So I wanted to get started with, so first just seeing the different animals that I see in the chat. It's really cool to see kind of an array of creatures, both more magical and then sort of your muggle creatures, right? So we have, owls, and we have Fluffy, who's not so much your average, companion animal dog, right? So in the books, we really get to see all sorts of creatures, and we see how characters interact with them on a day-to-day basis, with Hagrid with, Fang, and Harry with Hedwig, and sort of a more companion animal side of things. But then we also see animals being used, their bodies used for potion ingredients, right? And we see them being exploited for carrying mail and all different things like that. So at the Protego Foundation, we like to, bring up not just the good side of, you know, animals and how we see them interact, but also the way that we could kind of envision a better world for magical and muggle creatures is sort of the main thing. So I'm trying to pull up my notes here. I have like 10 tabs open. So I think I wanted to just start out with, and people can put in the chat or, so because we have a lot of people, we weren't really sure how many folks we were going to have. And I appreciate, you know, everyone being muted right now because it is difficult to talk, you know, when there's a lot going on. But I also do want this to be like a discussion, and I want it to be where people can really chime in, and I want to hear your voices and everything. I think my first question is what creatures stand out to you in this book? So what creatures do we see and who interacts with them? And that's kind of a big question because there's a lot of creatures in this book, right? But this is just kind of a way to get the conversation going. The snake at the zoo is a really good one. So Lydia said the snake at the zoo. In the work that I'm doing for my thesis, a lot of what we talk about is othering and so kind of setting the non-human animal separate from humans. At the Protego Foundation, we always use they when we're talking about an animal. An individual animal is a they. So what is their name? You know, what is its name? And so every time I was, you know, came across that pronoun it in the book, when I was reading and, you know, the snake, it said this and it did that. It was just interesting because you also see Harry sympathize with the boa constrictor a lot. And Harry thinks, you know, he must be really lonely. And he even says in one part, I wrote it down, he says, it didn't look in the mood. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. So you can see characters, these people can empathize or they sympathize with these animals, but there's still that disconnect between them. So yeah, the snake is a really good example because that was the first kind of first part of the book where I really saw Harry. I mean, it was the very beginning of the book, so obviously, but where a character interacts with an animal, besides, you know, gently removing, I don't know if gently, hopefully, the spiders off of his socks when Harry was moving into, or getting up for the day, or however that was.
And I think that that part is very indicative of Harry's like compassionate side, is that, you know, the fact that he does live in this area where all these other spiders like inhabit, and he still like takes them off of his socks. Like even as a kid, as somebody who's always had like an affinity with spiders, I've always loved that part because it's like, how many people here are like freaked out about, you know, or freaked out when you see a spider? Like I know so many people, even some people who are like the most animal friendly people I know still are like, okay, I love animals, but we'll get that spider away from me. And then, of course, Chamber of Secrets happens, you know. But I've always loved that part about Harry and how he's able to, I don't know, show some kind of compassion by getting the spiders off of his socks because he shares that space with them too. It's kind of cute. Like there's companions. So that's something that I've always really liked about that part. Definitely,
yeah. I think it says. Harry pulls a spider off of his socks. The cupboard was full of them. And it's not like in a, you know, he's being attacked by these spiders and it's the, you know, it's just kind of a nice, like, oh, there's spiders and they're just chilling and we can all just kind of coexist, I guess, with these spiders in the closet or in the cupboard. That's a really good point, Tyler. Does anyone else have anything about the snake at the zoo or maybe the other animals at the zoo or the spiders before we move on to a little bit later in the series or in the book?
I did notice later on, Molly said that Harry isn't something you goggle at in a zoo when everyone was kind of like really interested in who he was. So I thought that was an interesting comparison that she recognized that you just goggle at animals in a zoo.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't actually thought about that because I think I overheard when my mom was listening to the audiobooks. That's when Fred and George, right, are saying like it's Harry, like, you know, on the train it's Harry Potter, and then Molly says don't, you know.
Yeah, is that that scene? I think Ginny's like, oh, let me go see him, Mom.
Yeah,
that part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they recognize that animals are being goggled at in the zoo, and it makes them feel like if a human wouldn't want that done to them, right? But it's okay for animals to be goggled at in the zoo. That's a really good point. I mean, it's not okay. That's, you'll see me use a lot of air quotes when I'm like, it's not actually cool. Yeah, that's a really good point. And then also just kind of a side note, when I was reading, even in the first 2 or 3 chapters, the like idioms and the metaphors, and I don't know that much about those kind of speech things, but what they are actually called. But we see in the first chapter, it says Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Dudley looked like a pig in a wig in the second chapter, and then Piers Polkins had a face like a rat. Hagrid had beetle eyes. So the books don't shy away from using animals as like representative of sounds or feelings or, you know, looks or anything. They're just kind of used. I don't think that it was meant necessarily. I don't think when, you know, the books were written, did anyone think there would be a group of 26 people sitting down and talking about, you know, saying exactly how the animals were seen and represented in the books. But I think that just looking at how embedded animals are in our everyday language is also really interesting. And we've talked about that a lot in the Protego Foundation, and just how I know that Tyler worked with PETA on like the idioms, using animal names and idioms and saying instead of grab a bull by the horns, it's the roses by the thorns or something like that. So we do, like, if you start to kind of take stock of your everyday speech, you'll notice probably, or other people's speech, how often we use, just the other day I said something about, oh, I'll just send it snail mail. And I was like vegan snail mail, you know, is it a consenting snail, or, you know, and then I just said USPS because these are just phrases that are so natural for us to say. So it was kind of a separate little thought there. I'm just looking through the chat now to see if there's
Kay had raised their hand.
Okay, awesome. Kay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Kay.
Hello. I have a couple thoughts on what you all were just saying. My first one is, I kind of mentioned it in the chat too, this idea that snake in specific was bred in captivity, and just kind of this idea of like, oh, well, if the animal didn't know an outside life or a better life, if you will, does that make it better or worse? I guess that's kind of an interesting question to think about, versus animals that they would capture that were living in the wild and would bring in to like a zoo type environment. I mean, obviously I don't like either, but it's an interesting thought. And my other one, and then you guys can comment on this, is about Parcel tongue and how it's interesting what an emphasis they play in the series on this idea of like snake language and that snakes can talk, when it's like, well, can't like every animal talk? And why do we not hear about, like, I don't know, owl tongue or something? I don't know, just like all these other languages that exist amongst other species.
Yeah. So like, why is there parcel tongue, but why is there not like wizards who can speak to like other animals?
Yeah. Do they mention other like animal languages at all?
Right, like, can Godric Gryffindor speak to lions, you know, or does Helga Hufflepuff have some kind of like ability to speak to badgers, you know?
Right, or whatever your animagus is. Like, if someone has an animagus that's a snake, can they speak parcel tongue?
I feel like that's almost like a form of speciesism in a way, like kind of putting snakes in this high level of like, these are intelligent beings, they can speak, we can understand them. You know, and I can't see like JKR, like, you know, having written that, you know, language in mind with like, you know, maybe pigs or something, even though they're super intelligent. But I like almost see that as like her saying that like snakes are worthy of communication, and maybe like certain other animals aren't as much.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Just a theory.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for us to dive into Prisoner of Azkaban when we get to animagi, because that's going to be a very interesting topic, especially looking at it from the lens of animal rights. Is do you have a stronger affinity for that? I saw that I think Story in the chat mentioned something really interesting, how in a way animals are considered other or not considered at all, and how Harry, is considered a freak and he might feel akin to the animals who aren't cared for. That's a very interesting point as well. And I think the way that he describes the snake in the zoo and how he's at least is able to like leave the house, I always find that part very, very interesting. And I think that he might feel some kind of akin with that snake.
Yeah, I had Hannah raise her hand, and then their hand, and then Lydia will be next.
Yeah. So looking at the like the snake part of things, I always because like that does bring up a really good question. Like, as much as I talk to this cat right here, I don't think that he can, like, he knows what I'm saying, and I don't really know what he means. He just yells at me a lot. But I do think, like, in terms of like the serpent thing, like Salazar Slytherin was a Parcel tongue, like it's in like the Marvolo and like the Gaunt family, like that's just like something that is like with them. So I also kind of wonder if it's almost like an ancestral thing. Like I know some books, like I just read a book by Charles DeLint that was called Someplace to Be Flying, and it essentially talks about how like all of the people in the book are like descendants of animals, and they like became human as time goes on. So I kind of wonder if it's like almost like a wizard folklore type of situation where like maybe like that family line can speak to snakes because they are like descendants of snakes, and that's like how they came to be. Like maybe there are like maybe there's a family that's descendant of pigs, and they're like they can super communicate with them. Like I think that it isn't necessarily a thing where it's like they were two separate entities and like this specific person can speak to snakes. I feel like it's like there was like some type of meeting point. At least that's my.
That just, if I could jump in real quick, that just like led me down a really weird like train of thought, and how how like the Gaunt family and the Marvolos, they're very blood purists. They're very much like into like their blood status, and how they would, it's said in the books how they inbreed, they keep it in the family, they do that. I wonder if, as you're kind of saying, I think it's Hannah, how we've all kind of descended from different animals, and maybe because a lot of wizards didn't do that like blood trait has like kind of like fizzled out or like thinned out or watered out, whereas like the Gaunts and the Marvolos, their blood status is so concentrated because of their intermingling, if you will, that's why they can still do like Parcel tongue and stuff. Like that was very interesting.
Yeah.
So now we'll go into a deep discussion about bloodlines and
we'll save that for Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah. Next meeting, or I guess Half-Blood meeting, that fit that in.
And Lydia also had a thought, and then I have Nastasia is next.
Thanks. Hi everyone, nice to meet you. Actually, this is kind of similar to what Elizabeth just put in the chat about the cultural emphasis or negativity towards snakes. And I know that like, this isn't specifically related to Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone, but I know that like J.K. Rowling's like Christianity influenced a lot of her writing, and the fact that like snakes are seen as this like biblical corruptive kind of thing is really interesting. And we see that obviously with negativity with Nagini later books, and specifically related back to Sorcerer's Stone. I think somebody mentioned pigs a few minutes ago, and it just reminded me of when Hagrid gives Dudley a pig's tail, and how that's like for comic effect, and it kind of fits into this narrative of pigs as like not being like noble creatures, or I don't know, something like that. So just a thought.
Yeah, God. I mean, what does Hagrid say in that part? He says there was the only thing that was like left to do was like give him a tail, basically, something like that. I mean, I get why she put that part in there for like laughs and stuff, but does anybody else now looking at that feel? I don't want to compare Dudley Dursley to this loving, caring pig. Am I the only one in that situation?
I don't think you're alone in that. No, Tyler. Yeah, Molly, were you? Oh, was someone else? Jordan, sorry, I'm like jumping on the the line.
Oh, I was just gonna like chime in on the whole, like that scene actually was really disturbing for me. A, because I think pigs are probably more intelligent than Dudley, but B, I felt like rather than being like an animal discussion point, that was almost like a bit of fat phobia. Like just in terms of like, and people are always like, you know, pigs are big, so you know if a human is big, then we call them a pig, like, you know, that type of thing. But it could also be like, you know, an insinuation that pigs are the butt of jokes and they're not that intelligent and blah blah blah. But obviously we know that's not the case. So yeah, no, those are good points, Lydia. Thanks for bringing those up.
Yeah, and then what was it? Lydia, you probably remember this. What was that? We did trivia the other night, and it was about comparing. Was it comparing Dudley? Oh no, comparing somebody to. What was that? Oh, you're muted. I don't remember. But it was like, again, with Catherine, like you said, with the fat phobia, and we see that kind of as a recurring theme. And there are a lot of problematic, you know, themes in the books, and that could be a whole other book club meeting. But a lot of, like body shaming, and we see that with a lot of characters who are either, you know, like extremely large or extremely skinny, and it means like that, you know, we see that. And I mean, in the first page, it talks about Mr. Dursley, and this is getting away from animals, so we'll circle back, but like being a big beefy man with hardly any, and just like the image, I think images and describing people was very important to, you know, the author when it was being written, and in a way that kind of set the scene for that like comic relief, and just just portraying characters as sort of objects, sort of like objectifying. And then we see a lot of that relating it back to animals when we see, like I mentioned before, Pierce has a face like a rat, I think, and then just a lot of what was it? Oh yeah, in another book, she compared Dudley to a whale. Well, I guess it was Harry as the narrator compared Dudley to like a whale in another book. So yeah, it kind of comes back to that the size thing. But those were all really, really good points.
One thing I noticed about the Dursleys too, I feel like just the description of them is trying to make them seem like horrible people. And there are a few times where they use animals to accentuate that. So they'll talk about Dudley, like he had a tortoise that once he threw through the greenhouse, and one time he ran over the neighbor's dog. So I feel like they use animal cruelty to enhance the fact that the Dursleys are just awful. So in a way, that's a good thing, but still sad to read about.
That is a good point too. How I didn't catch it this time when I was going through it, how there is so much tying animal cruelty, like blatant non-magical animal cruelty, to the Dursleys. I didn't even pick that up. That's a really good point, Valerie.
And Valerie, if I could jump in, to your point, I noticed that kind of theme as well, like tying animal cruelty to the Dursleys and sort of saying that's bad. But at the same time, when Harry was receiving his letters, something that really struck me, now that I went vegan, I started paying more attention to the food in the books. What they did is Harry received 24 eggs full of letters, and it was just reading that now as a vegan, it was so sickening. Because you had an owl who carried this letter, hundreds, thousands of owls carrying this letter, written in ink, which may or may not be vegan, written by quills, stuffed in eggs. It's just the wastefulness of it. I think maybe like the author started with sort of associating cruelty with Dursleys, but just did a really bad job of it, separating the good wizard world. And then I also noticed later, you know, Dumbledore's mentioned who found 12 uses for dragon blood. And I just thought that was so interesting because, like, well, before, I guess maybe there were no uses for dragon blood. Maybe there would be less demand for, like, dragon parts, and, like, killing dragons would be, like, less of a thing. But here's Dumbledore, the character that's portrayed as a positive character, like finding these uses and further like materializing animals in that way. So something that I wanted to add.
That's a great point. And I I will say that that deleted scene in Philosopher's Stone where Aunt Petunia's at the kitchen sink and she's like opening the eggs. It's so comical, but then it's one of those things where when you stop and you look at it, you're like, how did those letters get in those eggs? It's like
Yeah, I was rereading just yesterday, and one of the scenes I picked up on, again, this is very early in the book, but in the letters from no one, when they're out in the middle of that, like, the water, and they had to take the boat to get there, and Hagrid shows up. And then Hagrid, I'll read it because it was kind of, it was funny.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, same. I know exactly what you're going to say.
Well, like when he pulls the real owl out of his, and so it's it says Hagrid pulls out a real, live, rather ruffled looking owl, right, from his like cloak or cape or whatever he's wearing, and then a long quill. And just like, first of all, Hagrid is a character who I would love to talk a lot about, because he's a really good example of like dissonance when it comes to our love for animals and then our exploitation of them, and how it can be really hard to like separate that for a lot of folks, certain practices and everything. But he pulled a literal owl out of his pocket and then wrote a letter to Dumbledore using a quill, and then gave the owl money and then sent them off to like fly. And I don't know if Catherine or Tyler, since you knew where I was going with that, if you have any thoughts about that specifically, but
well, it's just the idea of who is, so you have this owl, right, who's already been in the pocket of this giant, and now there's this giant storm, awful weather, terrible storm. We see how it's described and how it's portrayed in the actual film, and Hagrid takes this owl and is just like, okay, go, and it's just like, how do we know that the owl made it? It's just another example of the blatant disregard for owls.
Well, and even in the first chapter, that's when I first realized that, oh my gosh, Vernon Dursley is talking about, so many owls in the skies over Britain. And I'm just like, man, they were really working those owls very, very hard that day. And like, the money that's given to the owls is for postage. It's not for the owls themselves. Like, they're not, getting that reward for doing a job or whatever. But yeah, no, I had the same thought about like, oh my gosh, you're sending that owl out into that storm. That's completely horrible. After you probably like rumpled it by sitting on it or like squishing it on the way over. Like,
definitely.
It's just, it's weird for Hagrid, who's someone who professes that he loves animals, to kind of treat another animal in that manner.
Yeah.
Not to mention he had another pocket full of mice for the owl, presumably like suffocating in there.
I feel like that's, I don't know, I just put in the chat, but it's kind of like the part of a bigger picture thing that it shows the dissonance of the friend animals versus the animals that we don't care for. I mean, pigs are a great example. Like we were having this whole, everyone's talking about pigs. No one has any positive regard for pigs. None of the characters seem to have any positive regard for pigs in the series. Owls, kind of, except they don't necessarily take good care of them. Hagrid, being that example there. But there's such that dichotomy of like animals that are our friends and our pets versus animals that we use for our benefit, for our potion ingredients, for delivering our mail, and like. The dissonance really is, it's just the strongest with Hagrid, but it shows with every character too, because you see Harry is like commiserating with the snake, and then he's like, oh, well, let me use these quills to write letters that I will send with my owl, and let me use these animal ingredients in potions. And he doesn't seem to really see the issue with like making some animals our friends and some to be used for our benefits.
It even happens within the animal companion pet animals as well, because Hagrid, when he's like, oh, I'm going to get you an owl because no one wants a toad. Like, you'll be made fun of if you had a toad. So even within those few animals that you're allowed to bring to school, some are better than others for no real reason.
And And to add to that, it seems that like an animal's value seems to be in its youthfulness. Like when Ron is describing Scabbers, for example, he's just saying, oh, he's old, fat, useless, and I'm going to try to make him yellow to make him more interesting. So it's almost like, well, if the animal is not benefiting you in any way, it doesn't make you look cool, at least let's see if we can entertain ourselves with this. And like we have no idea, like if Ron is not concerned, like if the spell will hurt Scabbers, like would it make him like just uncomfortable being yellow? Like nothing. There's really no regard there. And there's also like kind of like to everyone's point about Hagrid, there's this kind of a chilling quote. Hagrid had enough force to knock over a cart horse. And it kind of reminded me of like, just like everyone was saying, you know, some other language that we use every day, like at work, I hear a lot, oh, there are so many ways to skin a cat. And it's just so chilling. And it's kind of, when I read this quote, I kind of felt the same way, like, why bother describing him this way? There's so many other ways that you can describe Hagrid. Like, there's so many other things you can use, but you chose to use that. And, you know, it's just like the Hogwarts. When I read the chapter where we finally, like, figure out what the Hogwarts like what is the logo emblem is, and it's all animals. And I was like, the fact that this book is so short, it like the author owes the brevity of the book to these animal imagery that is just a shorthand and easy way of describing things, but it's chilling, and there are probably better ways of describing. There's another quote that, like, before I jump off, Vernon makes a noise when Hagrid's there, and the quote says, like a mouse being trotted on. And I was like, oh my god, like rodents, just in this book, like Scabbers as a rat, like rodents being in like Hagrid's pockets, they're just there to be a meal for another animal. And just like this description of Vernon, like Peter Polkis, like having a rat's face. Like it seems that the books, I was talking to my sister about this, it seems that the books are perpetuating these negative stereotypes of animals. And it just makes it so much easier for regular folks to continue to be cruel and careless. Kind of like it's just, you know, rats are just known for being dirty and like bringing disease, and like, is it really that bad that we continue testing on them? You know, it's kind of, it perpetuates these like societal things. It's just really like chilling.
Yeah, I definitely see that. The book normalizes this kind of speech. And I know that even, you know, the last time I read the books was probably close to a year ago now, and I wasn't reading them from an animal rights perspective. Like I always have animals on the brain. I've been vegan for like 7 years now, and so I always have that kind of in the back of my head. But I definitely didn't pick up on until this reread the last couple of days, like the noise that you said, mouse, like a mouse being trotted on, and then like let out a howl like a wounded dog, and all of these kind of things that that again are like normalized, and that we just kind of see as, yeah, like that makes sense, that I can hear that noise in my head and it would sound like a mouse, and we don't really think about that in like, that's like chilling. Like, I mean, you the words, everything you said, you use like really good descriptive words for all of these things, and it's true. And yeah, it's just a lot to read when you're focusing specifically on the animal rights side of things, or just focusing on the animals in general, because like you said, animals are everywhere in the book, and not necessarily, and they're not the main characters. You know, we have some animals who are more, again, quotes, but important than others for the sake of the plot and for the sake of the story, but there's probably not 2 pages that goes by in the entire first book where there's not a mention of an animal, whether it's as a metaphor or some kind of descriptive imagery. So that's really good. And then, yeah, Megs and then a couple other people in the chat, I see a lot of talk about Hagrid, and Hagrid wearing his dragon hide boots and his oilskin coat, and like all of these different, these pieces, these, you know, the flesh or the skins of an animal. But then he loves his animals, and, you know, spoiler for the next couple books and everything, but care of magical creatures. And, you know, he's a character that we associate a lot with animals, yet he, like, I think when we talk about what characters can we see going vegan, a lot of people, you know, we don't necessarily jump to Hagrid. I mean, we want all the characters vegan, but that's not my first thought, because I see him as eventually yet, but making that connection of the animals that I love are the same as the animals that, you know, I'm wearing and I'm eating. And even when he goes to rescue Harry or to give him his letter, he pulls out sausages and then he throws the owl into the storm. And there are all these things that, even though we associate Hagrid, we think of him as an animal lover, there's just that kind of that disconnect there. And I think it's really apparent in his character. Yeah, and Molly says he doesn't love a lot of the animals. A lot of times he just loves how interesting they are, which goes back to, like, treating, you know, Scabbers is old, so he's not cool, so let's make him yellow, because then what can he give to us? And so we center these animals we don't center these animals, we center ourselves and then say and this happens in the magical world and in our own, you know, muggle world, how are animals of use to us? You know, how do they revolve around our lives? And what do they provide for us, you know, whether it's entertainment, whether it's joy. I mean, I have companion animals. I have cats, I have a dog, hermit crabs, birds, and like a lot of these animals, you know, we could get into domestication and all of that, but I have 2 or 3 rescue hermit crabs. I just rescued one like 2 months ago, but she burrowed and I haven't seen her in like over a month, which is frustrating. But anyway, she's fine. Her name's Millicent. But these hermit crabs would probably be better off in the wild or their natural environment. Yet we bring them into our homes, and these ones were rescued from, you know, the pet trade and everything. But I kind of lost my train of thought there, but they provide entertainment for me. Like, do I like going and watching them? We got Draco, one of them. We got all 3 of them, but Draco was the only one who uses it right now, a little spinner, kind of like a hamster wheel, and he goes on it and he goes around, and like, yeah, I like watching him, and he provides that entertainment for me, you know, sometimes. I mean, you could say it that way, but the whole point of having companion animals and loving animals is that they are there in the environment that's best for them, compared to, you know, since they can't be in their own natural environment, I guess. And so that's the difference between loving an animal and loving what an animal can provide for you, if that made any sense. But yeah, those are all really
her hand up.
So kind of a little bit of a circle back to Hagrid was what I wanted to talk about. And just how, like, as we see in the future, when he gets the job as the Care of Magical Creatures professor, like, I think Harry or whatever kind of dictates that there's no one else he could see as, you know, the best person for the job. And yet we keep seeing characters like Grubbly Plank that actually know what the heck they're talking about and give, you know, care about the animals, obviously, and are thinking about their well-being. You can see that from it, but it's like he's really the worst person that you could probably learn anything about animals from, just because of his, like, obsession with animals, and like that as was said, like he finds them interesting, like he wants to investigate them or like own them so that he can like watch them, obtaining Norbert just because he thinks it would be really cool to have a dragon, even though it's keeping him inside of a tiny hut and he's a baby, you know, or she really taken from her family from who knows where to live in a hut somewhere that she's illegally supposed to be. And like a 4th book, I'm sorry to bounce around, he's breeding illegally like different creatures together, like that's where blasted roots come from. So it's just kind of one of those things that you see him as this jolly sweet giant, and he, you know, who cares about animals, but really he's like one of probably the most dangerous to animals, in my opinion.
Well, and that's why he got expelled, kind of.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, sort of, not really, but yeah.
in a way, it led to that.
Yes, yeah. It was a perfect opportunity to get him out of there, for sure.
Megs, I'm really happy that you went first, too, because, like, my thought process kind of ties together a lot of what you said, where it's like Hagrid is viewed as this character that is so good for animals, but how good is he? Like, he does all of these things that are just, like you said, like, it's like, you know, his moleskin coat and his beaver skin boots. And yeah, like Catherine even said in the comments, like, he slaps a rare steak on his face because he got a bruise. You live by the Black Lake, just go stick your face in it. Like, there's so many other things you could have done. And it reminds me too of, like, I'm sure a lot of people grew up the same way. Like, I grew up with dogs. My whole family makes fun of me. They call me a crazy cat lady because it's a term they've heard before. So because I have cats, it's like, oh, you're a crazy cat lady. And I get all this stigma of, like, you know, what does your cat even do for you? And I've really, especially on my, like, plant-based journey and, like, being a cat mom, which is just my favorite thing in the world, like, I really have realized that, like, when people say, like, oh, my dog's a really good dog, he's not a good dog. He's an obedient dog. Like, that dog has to follow all of these rules that you give him. And, like, Hagrid does that to so many animals, where he's like, yes, I believe that he truly loves him, but I think that there is a level of ignorance there that I think kind of exists across a lot of humanity, if you're a wizard or a muggle, where it's like, that just because you love it doesn't mean that you should contain it. Like, you need to give it its best life. So, like, I think my cats are fantastic. And I have one cat, you guys saw him earlier. He loves to be picked up. You pick that cat up and he is purring. He loves it. He lives in your lap. I have another cat who likes to come up on your lap, but she doesn't like to be picked up. And we have one cat that does not like to be picked up. And we don't force them to do anything differently. So I think that it's a really interesting thing to look at in the books, like, where are they judging these animals based off of their ability to follow directions, and where are they, like, what's the word for measuring? I'll just say measuring. And, like, where are they measuring, an animal's, I'm sorry, I have pain brain. I'm not good at words right now. Where are they measuring, like, an animal's, like, worthiness based off of how well they can respond to a command or how useful they can be? Like, you know, an owl is very useful because it can send letters. I would have brought a cat because it can cuddle with me if it wants to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Hannah, because what comes up for me is Mrs. Norris. I have so much love for Mrs. Norris and feel awful for her and how she's painted, and how it even says in the book that everyone wants to give her a kick. They want to kick Mrs. Norris. Like, that's abuse. But I think part of that stems from, because Mrs. Norris, she's been taught to, like, earn her worth. And, like, this is me kind of, like, formulating ideas, but, like, she's been taught by Filch that to, like, earn her worth, she needs to, like, you know, that's her usefulness to him, is to seek out troublemakers and people out of bed and all that kind of stuff. And so the students hate that. And so then they hate her, but all she's trying to do is just, like, you know, show loyalty to the person that feeds her. So I always feel really bad for Mrs. Norris and how she's trying to, like, earn her worth, even though, like you said, Hannah, she's a cat who just deserves worth because she's alive. And then Kay had their hand up next.
Hello again.
Hi.
I was going to chime in to say that, so I think that there's quite a few things that would be different if J.K. Rowling was writing this series today rather than, you know, back in the 90s or whenever she began writing. I think there are some things that would be a little bit different, just to be more inclusive, but I think this idea of, like, her version of, like, animals as commodities and how the world sees animals, the majority of the world, I think that honestly wouldn't have changed much, unfortunately. I think that she would still reference animals in the same way. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but there's, like, a new eHarmony commercial, and it's literally this man in the park with his dog, and he says to the camera, "If I want to go on a walk, I take this guy. But for a real relationship, I go on eHarmony." He literally said a real relationship. And I was like, what? You can have a real relationship with your animal companion. What is this nonsense? So it's everywhere. Crazy.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kay. And that's funny. I haven't seen that commercial, but just goes back to the way that people view animals, I guess, and their relationships with them. But about JK, so when I'm reading Harry Potter, when I'm watching, like different show like Friends, or I was watching a show the other day, that Arrested Development, or I think it was, and some things that I see are kind of like cringeworthy, and it usually has to do with representation, or like both LGBTQ representation, or like racial representation and all of that. And I think when I'm reading Harry Potter, I definitely pick up on things and I'm like, ugh, like that's not good, or like fat phobia, and we see a lot about that with like size and ableism and all of that. But the animal side of things, like, doesn't shock me that this book says certain things about animals. Like when I read something about like, again, the fat phobia, like now people are starting to see that as not good, or like people have been, but like there's a lot of things that we can pick up on in media, and specifically with Harry Potter, that we recognize as being wrong. I don't think that the average person who isn't coming at this from an animal rights lens reading this would pick up on the misrepresent, or I guess not misrepresentation of animals, but the mistreatment, that's the word I was looking for, mistreatment of animals. People wouldn't read this book and be like, this is horrible, because it's just, I don't think we're there yet as a society to recognize these things as bad, which is, yet again, we're getting there and we're trying, but I don't think that, so what you said, Kay, about that, just, it really makes sense. Like, I think that the book is still kind of stuck in the 90s and somebody else said something about the 90s, and Nicole, they said something about the 90s being, like, JKR is very much 90s progressive and hasn't moved on. And we definitely see a lot of that in the series too. But I think the animal representation hasn't really evolved much in the world, if that, I see Tyler nodding, so one person gets what I'm saying at least.
Yeah, I'm
I get it.
Yeah, where it makes sense. It makes sense. I do think that I'll give us a little bit of credit here in that we have 25 people here currently who are all bringing up various different animal rights issues within the book. Honestly, that's a lot more than I was expecting. When we were doing this book club, I was like, oh man, I don't know if everybody's gonna get that we're trying to look at this story through a lens of animal rights. But you've all brought up such great points that I think we are starting to see that, where we're going to see more and more people reading this series and picking up on those same kind of things that we look at now as 90s progressive stuff, but now it's like 90s progressive stuff for animals. Now we're starting to see that, and it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Well, almost sometimes even if any of you have watched the Fantastic Beasts movies, that's kind of where it starts to go. So maybe there's been a little bit of change since these books first came out, in the way that, the people writing about the Wizarding World perceive, or reading about the Wizarding World perceive, how they treat animals.
Yeah, I like to think that Newt Scamander, being the main character of Fantastic Beasts, is kind of a, acknowledging that. So I really appreciate Fantastic Beasts for that reason. We do have to also remember that, and anything about the magic in Harry Potter is based on historical things. Like J.K. Rowling didn't create everything, but when it comes to things like referring to Dudley as a pig, that's where it's a bit unfortunate and disappointing, for sure. Even transfiguration class is basically animal testing class. Someone mentioned animal testing earlier, and it seems like they're always using animals, which obviously is not great. But it's not even just transfiguration. Potions, obviously, and charms even. At one point, the book says Professor Flitwick, he made Trevor zoom around the classroom as a demonstration. But it's like, why did you have to use Trevor? use a book or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we see all of these things. And again, if you're just doing a quick reread of the books, or any book, I'm reading a different series right now. And maybe if I went back and started it over with this framework, I would pick up on a lot of other things. So I might not have thought about, you know, like the sound. I keep going back to that mouse being trotted on. That was gonna stick with me now. But like, so that sound, you know, that Vernon made, or now, you know, like Valerie said, Trevor flying around the room or something because Professor Flitwick. So I think it's interesting to look at something through a specific framework. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we could look at Harry Potter through, you know, political framework, or through a framework of representation or lack thereof, and then animal rights. So this book is like chock full of examples that we could use to talk about animals and their mistreatment, cognitive dissonance in humans, and magical folks.
So I loved this quote that I found in like chapter, I think it was 15, where the Centaurs are like, it's not our business to run around like donkeys after stray humans in our forest. And to me, that just kind of encapsulates what I think I would love for people to realize, is that it's not animals' jobs to like do things for us or take care of us. So that quote just like really stood out to me, and I was like, this is where I want people to, you know, pinpoint like and get.
Yeah. Are you talking about the centaurs that are talking about like mules and donkeys?
Yeah. They're basically saying like, you know, you humans are coming into our forest and we don't have to clean up after you. That's not our job. Like, and I know it's a little different because they're like, you know, beings that also speak, you know, human language or whatever. But kind of like the idea of animals being able to say, hey, we're not going to deal with your stuff anymore. We're not cleaning up after you. Like,
but in a way, they're also acknowledging that mules and donkeys are used for
that's
things,
true.
Right?
That's true.
But that is really interesting. That definitely stood out to me as well.
Yeah. And kind of by in that saying that the use of mules and donkeys is a negative thing too, kind of like when Molly mentions the zoo, you know, don't ogle or goggle, whatever the phrase is, at him, like a zoo and an animal in the zoo. So it's saying it and kind of brushing it off, like not a big deal, the phrase, but it's normalizing that that's how we think of animals, as, you know, animals are ogled at and humans wouldn't like that. Donkeys are used and humans wouldn't like that. And like, what is it about humans that make it okay or make it not okay for something to be done, you know, unto them versus a non-human magical or muggle creature? That's a really good quote, Catherine. There was another quick thing that I wanted to add, just everyone to kind of leave off with. Lydia and I were talking earlier about the book in general, and the Mirror of Erised is, you know, a big plot point for this book. And she had the question, like, what would, for instance, Hedwig or, you know, another like a creature see looking in the mirror? Like, what do you think? And we don't have to discuss this, but that was such an interesting point. Like, what would a non-human animal, muggle, magical creature see when looking in the Mirror of Erised? I think that would be, Meg says, tweet at us. Yeah. So if you have an idea of what your companion animal, I know like my cat Poe would see probably food, Dipsy would see string, just surrounded by string or plastic. She loves plastic. Lala would just see herself being like carried around everywhere because she's a little diva. So you know, they have wants and desires too, and it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. Or what about Hedwig? Would she see herself hanging out with Harry, or would she see herself liberated and flying around, you know? So it's hard to say exactly, because I say that about my cats, and maybe they'd rather be, you know, going through in the woods, and they've never been in the woods, but you know, in their natural, quote unquote, environment, and all of that. So that's an interesting thought. So a couple little things to close up. So first, yeah, if our Twitter is Protego FDN, so Foundation FDN. Jordan put that in the chat here. So if anybody has anything that they want to tweet at us about their ideas of what a companion animal would see, or just a magical or muggle creature in general, feel free to do that. We also started a Slack channel for the book club, and we will send an email with that information to everybody once we have it up and running a little bit more, so that we can continue this conversation. Because I don't know about all of you, but I could stay on for another 6 hours and not get bored of all of this, because there's so much to talk about. And I think we hit about maybe 7%, seven's a good number, percent of the notes that I took about this book. And this is just Philosopher, Sorcerer, Stone. And we have 6 other books, and we can touch on movies, we can touch on Fantastic Beasts, we can do all of that. So this book club is definitely, it's a project, but it's one that I'm really looking forward to doing, and I want to hear more from everybody. And so we'll use that channel to keep in touch and to put your wildest ideas and your biggest qualms and all of just everything. We want to hear everything about it all. And thank you again so much for coming. So we're super grateful that everybody was able to join, and we love that we could provide this this meeting for everybody. If you'd like to make a donation, Protego Foundation is a nonprofit, and we do run solely on donations. So if you want to donate your favorite book number or something, that's definitely an option. Mine is book number 6, Half-Blood. I think a lot of us have, I know Tyler's doing, a lot of us like Half-Blood. That's our favorite books. And then we also have our website, protegofoundation.org. I'm just kind of reading through the chat in case anybody doesn't have their chat open. We also have a Protego Foundation Facebook group where I accidentally opened it, where some of our most engaged supporters, you can go on there and we'll have lots of cool information for everybody. And then our next book club session is January 27th, which is my grandpa's birthday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So January 27th, 8:30 p.m. Is going to be our next one.
I do want to give a quick shout out to all of our, the Protego Foundation does have a podcast called Protego Cast. And I see a bunch of our Patreon supporters there, Rebecca, Orion, Jack. Thank you guys so much for all that. If I didn't mention you, I'm so sorry. But yes, thank you guys for supporting us. And if you do want to listen to Protego Cast, you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of other places that you like to listen to podcasts. So
yeah. I'm going to hop on that gratitude chain and just say also we have our companion animal adoption fundraiser, and we have some of our adopters here in the house. So a lot of the same folks. We have Rebecca, Kay, Orion. Let's see, am I missing anybody? My mom also.
Mom.
Yeah. But so thank you so much. So that's we have a fundraiser where you can adopt a magical or muggle creature. We have rats, cats, owls, dragons, unicorns, and phoenixes. And every month you get a little update or some fun facts about that species, and we'll tell you how they're doing at their wizarding school. And you get like their image and a certificate and everything. So it's a really cool program. And thank you all so much for supporting us on that also. Well, thank you so much, and have a great night, everyone. And Protego Maxima.
Yeah, cute. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.